Uh,
Hi, Ryan. Sorry, we are experiencing a little bit of technical difficulty, but for everybody who just joined now, just a quick reminder, where you are. You're in the mentorship launch. This is really the opportunity, the key opportunity here for the audience to ask questions, to really interact with our speakers. So keep your questions coming. I know many of you have been asking questions, so please keep doing that in the chat. And I'm so happy to be with our last speaker for this hour today. His name is Ryan Soscia. He's the CEO of JDO, which is a company, and I'm sure you can explain this much better than I can. But it's a company it's a platform for an anonymous end-to-end encrypted platform for survivors of sexual assault or rape or harassment to stop repeat offenders. But Ryan, over to you, maybe just in 3 sentences, just like the other speakers. Who are you and what do you do, so our audience knows to ask the right questions? Over to you, Ryan.
yeah, thank you so much for the introduction. My name is Ryan Soscia, founder and CEO of a tech company called JDO. We're a public benefit corporation on a mission to eradicate sexual misconduct around the world. And specifically, we approach these issues by building something to address underreporting of these types of crimes, which are historically very underreported, with the notion that by increasing reporting rates, we can actually have an exponential capacity to identify repeat offenders and to hold them accountable, either in the form of civil litigation, criminal prosecution, sharing reports with corporate HR, schools, things of that nature. And super excited to be here. Just wanted to give a quick shout out to Vital Voices on the Solidarity Council there, which is a group of men who all in their own sort of unique way, either through their professional or private work, are trying to advance the status of women globally and ultimately to end gender-based violence. So thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, no, thanks so much for being here, and thanks so much for the shout out to Vital Voices, who is co-organizing this mentorship launch with us, and you'll hear a lot more from them in our later sessions. So be excited for that. But I think I'll ask you maybe I'll steer away a little bit. This is all about mentorship, I know, but maybe just in light of recent events, and I think we're all we think about in the last couple of days and weeks, really, very present is Sarah Everard in our minds, the women who went missing while walking home at 9 p.m. in London. We now know she's been killed by a police officer, and we now know they're investigating a previous incident 2 weeks prior to that with the same police officer. So how does a platform like JDO help with those cases? Because in so many cases we hear about these incidents, and they're always, not always, but in so many cases it is repeat offenders. So how does a platform like JDO come in and help in these cases?
Yeah, that's a great question. So something like JDO is specifically designed to eliminate the downside to filing a report. Reports on the platform are owned and controlled by each individual, not even accessible to us. And it allows you to essentially report perpetrators by name, social media, phone number, etc., in a way that will never defame the perpetrator, nor could even be subpoenaed from the platform to reveal the identifying information of the reporting party. But so looking at these types of crimes, the status quo is that 1 in 10 of them will get reported. And that's really terrible. If murders were getting reported 1 in 10 times, like, that would be a terrible place to be. So that's kind of the status quo. And what that means for identifying repeat offenders is that it literally will take 20 people to be impacted before 2 would then be statistically likely to speak up, let alone a match gets made, let alone legal action is pursued or the perp is held accountable. But by increasing reporting rates through eliminating the downside to filing a report, we can effectively increase reporting rates from 1 in 10 to 1 in 3, which essentially allows us to identify those connections. The second that 2 individuals report it, if it's 1 in 3 reporting, then the new status quo is 6 people have to be impacted as opposed to 20, which is about a 70% reduction in the amount of time it takes for a system like ours to identify repeat offenders and to ultimately hold them accountable. So yeah, I think that this type of technology, a lot of people have thought of it, and really started working on this dating back to like 2013 sort of time frame. I actually came up with the idea after a close friend of mine had an experience with a local cross fitness trainer who happened to be stretching him out after a workout and ended up molesting him. Ended up, being there for my friend. I had some experience working in a law firm with these types of cases and kind of had an idea about the repeat offender statistics and whatnot. And within 24 hours of my friend confiding in me, we basically found 10 other individuals who had the same experience with the same guy. So that was really the aha moment from my personal experience, where I was like, wow, this type of technology needs to exist. Not only would it be hugely beneficial to the survivors, who often, more often than not, think that they're alone and statistically are not likely to be, but also for holding perpetrators accountable. If organizations like Lyft or any corporate entity or any school for that matter could be able to identify bad actors early on and see those patterns, certainly that they can come in and take more swift action and actually do something about it. So.
Yeah, no, thanks so much for also sharing, the personal story behind JADO, and just for the audience, just let's recuperate 1 in 10 cases being reported. That's just, the statistics are just really insane. So we have a question from the audience here. So as a mentor, what do you say to men in your circle who feel like that the idea of not all men still has a place in the conversation around women's safety?
Yeah, I definitely think that, being a male in this space, also, full disclosure, I'm a survivor myself. I think that, we are in this space with relative privilege. And for my friends that, might not think that all men are the issue or have, problems with those sort of statements, I call them out and say, you have to recognize, your relative privilege. I also grew up, with 2 dads who raised me, and oftentimes, I was in circles with a lot of athletes, and you'd hear a lot of homophobic type of remarks, and being at the school I was, you'd kind of never expect that would happen there. But I would always, as the oldest person in my class, I'd repeated a year. I would often use my position of relative privilege or authority, even in those circles, to always call out those individuals who might feel that it's okay to make those types of remarks in a large group. I'd say, do you really feel this way? Like, that's kind of messed up. You shouldn't be saying things like that. There are people here that is offensive to. So I've always kind of had a life of trying to call those things out and to educate my male peers. I think it's a lot harder to think about people who aren't in my position, having those types of conversations with their peers. But through the Vital Voices Solidarity Council, I think that all the different men in that organization really take a stand and try to educate their peers on behalf of these types of issues, and to call out misguided comments like that from men. So.
Yeah, no, thanks so much. I think, I'm so happy you called out this using your privilege to really, have that platform to speak out and to write some of these things that are being like locker room talk. We having a lot of questions coming in, so a lot of interest here. I have a question here about how do you manage to keep the information on your platform safe and private in order to protect the victims? Yeah,
it's a great question. We recently just filed a patent on this, so super excited. Hopefully it clears the USPTO. But so in essence, there are various layers of encryption that we use. Specifically, we use end-to-end encryption and this pretty interesting technology called homomorphic encryption. But essentially, when each user is filing a report, the reports are encrypted locally with private keys stored on their device. So whenever, someone puts a report into our database, it's encrypted locally, it's encrypted in transit, it sits encrypted in the system. And when we do comparisons among the data, we actually don't have an ability to decrypt the information. We could never access the database or the individual's information. And that also helps because even if the system's hacked, it's still safe. But so when we're comparing like plain text, say Harvey Weinstein to plain text Harvey Weinstein, we're not actually comparing the plain text representations of the name. We actually compare derivative representations, so encrypted representations of that data. And that's kind of the system that we built. It's one that is owned and controlled by each individual, but has this ability to function in the way that it needs to function without us ever having to know what the data is itself. The other thing that's pretty cool is if someone were to report Bill Cosby in California versus William Cosby or Billy Cosby in another region, our system's also capable of identifying that as a match, and it's all sort of embedded into the algorithm. But at the end of the day, that's sort of a brief summary of how the encryption layers are interacting. So.
Yeah, that's absolutely amazing. Fingers crossed for the patent going through. So, so many questions are coming in. So I think one really interesting question is with, we all know that the statistic in women in tech are looking rather bleak, and sponsors are often difficult to find in the tech world. So how does one in the tech industry respond to that, and how can mentorship help to have these women adequately represented in the tech space?
Yeah, that is a good question. So the main point is how to get women to be adequately represented in tech.
Yeah, and how does mentorship help with that?
Okay. Yeah, so I started learning computer science in high school. I was fortunate to have a brilliant teacher who happened to be female at my high school. And that was really where I fell in love with this sort of stuff. Going off to college, I think that, if I had started there, I would have been, not inclined to pursue this type of field. So it definitely was, select teachers over the course of my life that, have made me so inspired, and to really recognize that, you're limited by your imagination with this stuff. It's kind of like magic. But yeah, I think that it's certainly valuable to have mentors and to seek out mentors, in terms of getting into this field, in terms of just, continuing your career. I try to go out of my way to, certainly help those that, especially I was recently in this incubator program in Washington, D.C. called Halcyon Incubator. And one of the awesome things about that is like the vast majority of the founders in that community are either founders of color or female founders, which are traditionally, hugely not represented in the venture capital world or in the tech world. So it's really interesting to be, part of that community, and, being a minority, with respect to the community myself. But I think that, I certainly try to go out of my way, and like the female founders that I know who are kicking ass, I want to try to open as many doors as I possibly can for them. And even if they're, more successful than me, I just think that given the underlying statistics, like it's literally on all of us to, help these people, navigate these paths and try to get an upper edge with respect to the status quo. I was really fortunate early on to have incredible mentors, both male and female. And I think that it's probably important to have sort of a mix of different mentors, because at the end of the day, I don't think that any specific individual necessarily knows what's, the best for you. I think that it's really about the consistency and convergence of all these different perspectives, and then you being able to take in all that information and decide, what course to chart from there. Does that help to answer?
Yeah, no, that was an amazing answer. And I think we have kind of a follow-up question to that. So So if a tech company wants to, take a stance, but is on sexual harassment or gender equality, but they're worried about their bottom line, how should they respond to that?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question, and it's something that I've definitely come across a lot. We've been in conversations with some publicly traded entities, and we're like, hey, there are reports about your employees on this platform. We want to work with you in a survivor-centric way. The alternative is they can just be shared with firms like Quinn Emanuel, which is like the worst nightmare. They're one of the biggest firms in the world. They have a new sexual harassment and discrimination practice group, and it is like the worst nightmare for a corporation. So that being said, I think that there are a lot of ways that entities can go about doing the right thing. Specifically, if they're going to take a stand and say, we recognize that these crimes are hugely underreported, we're going to do things to alleviate that, and then be able to have these patterns we find and actually take charge on these actions, before they become a more significant problem to our organization. So I think that we're starting to see a lot more organizations adopt technologies like JADO. And another kind of similar experience was with respect to universities. When we first started, it was, pre-Me Too, and often we had to like really go out of our way to explain what this was and why it was needed and all that stuff. And for a long time, university administrators would always say like, like they had this concept that if you had a large number of reports on the campus, that is problematic. But the real problem is when universities have no reports or just a handful of reports on college campuses. So one of the inspiring things that I've kind of come across recently is when you speak with administrators and they get it. They have conversations with parents all the time who are initially concerned that, hey, there's a lot of reports on this campus. And then the administrators are educated enough to the point where they're like, well, you might think that's a bad thing, but it's actually a good thing because it means that we're addressing underreporting, and it means that we're not sweeping these types of things under the rug. So I think that the best thing that organizations can do is to, actually look at the underlying like metrics with respect to these issues. Specifically, my tunnel vision is underreporting. Like every organization, especially the big one, should be doing something to address underreporting of sexual harassment within their org. I have some really interesting data I'd love to share, but I'm kind of hesitant to, just because I don't want to break any NDAs. But we'll give a hypothetical example. There was an org that I know has about 18,000 employees. I won't say which one. And they have about 80 reports of sexual harassment reported annually to their HR folks. And there was recently a Deloitte study within the organization that said that over 30% of individuals, likely, significantly more women than men, experience sexual harassment in the workplace. So, 33% of 18,000, like that is a lot. That is far more than 80. If you're just relying on the status quo to address these issues, you're not doing enough. If you simply recognize that these crimes are hugely underreported and do something to alleviate that, I think that, the public will see that you're actually, doing the right thing. It's not necessarily going to come at a cost to your organization's bottom line. There's a lot of reasons why not doing anything about it could come and, eat up your bottom line. So I think that, I hope to see more organizations kind of step up to the plate and adopt technologies to address underreporting or various things under the sun that actually make an impact, as opposed to just having, seminars once a year for their employees or educating them on, video tutorials. So.
Yeah, no, thanks so much, Ryan. That was such an interest, especially like the last point, I think really resonated also with the audience with such an interesting point of view with the KPIs you're actually measuring. Is it, do you want lots of reports? Do you want little reports? So thank you so much. I think this was such an inspiring conversation. Thanks so much for joining. For everybody else, let's check out DJ Tessa, and please make sure to be back here at 1:15, where we'll have other amazing leaders in this mentorship launch. And thanks so much to Mashuk, Natasha, and Ryan. You were all great.
Thank you.
Thank you.